Thank you so much for joining us, Kat.
Thank you so much for having us, Brandy. And while I introduce myself, I'm going to start uploading my screen. But hi, everyone. I'm Kat Welbeck, Advocacy Director at the Student Borrower Protection Center. And I'm joined by my colleague, Amy. And I'll let Amy introduce herself while we get this set up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Salata. I'm the Outreach and Advocacy Manager at the Student Borrower Protection Center. Thanks so much for having us today.
Thanks, and we're so happy to be here. And just by way of background, the SEPC, we're a national nonprofit, and we're solely focused on the burden of alleviating student loan debt. And so we do that by engaging in a mix of advocacy, policymaking, and litigation strategy, all aimed at reining in industry abuses, protecting student loan borrowers' rights, and advancing economic opportunity for people with student loan debt. So we're really, really excited to be with you all today to talk a little bit about public service loan forgiveness. A couple of things. I just want to do another round of thanks to Brandy for having us here today, and for everyone who's on the line. We're so happy to talk about PSLF. And then also, what we're going to do, we're going to go through the public service loan forgiveness program. So the way we're going to start, we're going to talk about how the program generally exists, how it's existed since it started in 2007. We're then going to talk about changes that have recently happened in the past year for this 1-year time limited waiver that ends on October 31st of this year. So we're going to talk about the old program rules and how they work after October 31st, but then also walk you through the steps of this waiver that you can take advantage of over the next couple of months. And then we're going to end with questions. So please, throughout this presentation, please drop your questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer them when we get to them at the end. Alrighty, so to start, as I mentioned, what is PSLF? How did this program start, and how long has it existed? So Congress created the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program in 2007, and the idea was to help public service workers who had student debt and make sure that future students and future graduates wouldn't be deterred from entering public service, serving their communities, and working in service, so they wouldn't be saddled with debt, right? So PSLF is a promise that if you work in public service and make payments for 10 years, the remainder of your debt is going to be canceled. But as we're going to see, this has been a little bit complicated. So again, I'm going to start with how it works and what some of those issues were and why it didn't work as simply as that promise of 10 years in service and your debt is canceled. And then show you how to benefit from this current waiver period so you can get PSLF loan forgiveness. Alrighty, so let's start. What are the requirements of the program? So generally, more simply than working in public service for 10 years, there are 4 specific criteria that you have to fulfill in order to get public service loan forgiveness, and they're on the screen. So first, you need to have the right type of loan. That's a direct loan. It's one of several types of federal student loans, and we're going to talk about loan types in a little bit. Second, you need to be on the right repayment plan. And for this program, that is generally an income-driven repayment plan. Third, you need to work in public service, and then everyone here, we fulfill that by being nonprofits. And then fourth, you need to make 120 qualifying payments. So that's 10 years worth of payments. That's where we get 10 years from. So I'm going to go a little bit more in detail on each of those requirements in just a second. So let's talk about having the right type of loan. So only direct loans qualify for public service loan forgiveness. Direct loans have been the primary federal student loan since 2010. So if you took out a loan since 2010, it likely qualifies. But if you have an older student loan that you took out prior to 2010, so for example, a Family Federal Education Loan, you're going to hear me say the acronym for this a lot, called FFEL, so FFEL, or a Perkins loan, those do not qualify. But what you can do is consolidate those loans into a new direct loan. So it's like refinancing your loan with the federal government, and it pays off that old federal loan and replaces it with a new federal loan. So under the normal program, when you do this, you lose any credit for forgiveness that you earned on the old loans that you're consolidating, since you're essentially taking out a new loan. But as we're going to talk about in a minute, during this special waiver period, that's not the case. So if you have an older FFEL loan or Perkins loan, you can consolidate and still get your credit. So it's really important to note that under the normal program, most people who have FFEL loans or Perkins loans are blocked out for this reason, but under this waiver period, you can be included. All right. So next, in addition to having direct loans, you need to be in the right repayment plan, which is generally an income-driven repayment plan, or you're going to hear me say this acronym a lot, IDR. It doesn't matter how much you're paying, it's just that it's the right plan. So these plans go by a lot of different names like income-based repayment or IBR, income contingent repayment, ICR, pay, PAYE, or repay, REPAYE. Some other payment plans that can qualify in certain instances, but in general, you want to be in an IDR plan, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. Alrighty, so the next requirement. In order to get public service loan forgiveness, you need to work in public service. And so again, really, really important to note here. The focus is on who your employer is, not what your role is at your employer. So again, I know everyone here works for nonprofits, and so it's really important to know that you work for qualifying organizations, but I'm also going to talk about other employers so that you know if you have friends, family members, neighbors who might work for qualifying employers, please share this information because we want as many people as possible to be able to get their debt canceled through PSLF. So you can work at a government organization, so that covers city, state, federal employees, a 501c3 nonprofit or other certain nonprofits. You also have to work full-time. So one thing that's really important to note is full-time for the purposes of PSLF is a minimum of 30 hours a week, or what your employer designates as full-time. So another important thing to note is that the 30 hours can be with more than one employer. So for example, we get people asking a lot, what if I work part-time jobs? If you work multiple part-time jobs for qualifying employers and that adds up to 30 hours a week, that counts. And so the final requirement for PSLF, you have to make 120 qualifying payments. So again, payments on the right loan, the right payment plan, and during your current employment. So the payments have to be made in full and on time. If you leave public service and then come back, you can continue to accrue those credits and you don't need to start over. So the payments and the time of employment don't have to be consecutive. Alrighty. There also have been some changes during COVID that I really want to alert you to that are really important. So first, loans getting the payment pause, so those owned by the federal government. So each month of suspended payments count towards PSLF. That's amazing, right? So, so even though you may not have been making payments during the payment pause because they were paused by the federal government, those will count towards your 120 payment total. But you still need to make sure that you meet the other 3 criteria that we talked about. So, and again, the most relevant criteria is public service, having a public service employer. Okay, so what we're going to talk about briefly is what has changed during this program and how we got here. So one thing that's fascinating about the public service loan forgiveness program is that the promise is pretty simple. Again, like I talked about at the beginning, if you work in public service for 10 years, then you should get your debt canceled as long as you meet those other 4 requirements. But what we've seen is that initially the rejection rate for this program was 99%. So most people who are applying to this program were not getting through. So we hear all the time stories about people who said they've worked in public service for many years, they did 10 years of service and it wasn't working for a range of issues. So it was a really big problem, but we saw that people were getting derailed either because they had the wrong loan, they weren't in the right repayment plan, or some other technical reason that kept them off from getting credit for PSLF. But what we realized is that many people took out debt to get the education they needed to be teachers, to be government lawyers, to work in advocacy organizations, to work for nonprofits, to serve their communities. But specifically, not only because they wanted to serve their communities, but also they were told if they worked in these careers for 10 years, they would be able to get their debts canceled. But we saw, again, because that promise wasn't met, many people got discouraged. So in the summer of 2021, the Department of Education, for the first time ever, opened a request for information asking borrowers to tell about their PSLF experience. So what this was an opportunity for borrowers who've worked in public service to talk about their experience about getting locked out of the forgiveness program because of a range of bureaucratic criteria. Or someone who would delay their retirement just to get the extra qualifying payments. And so always asking the Biden administration to fix this program. The president said he came in, it was going to fix the student loan system. And so people were saying, you have to fix this program. It's not working. And what ended up happening The Department of Education got more than 50,000 comments saying this program is broken, it's not working, we're not getting credit the way that it was intended. So what ended up happening, within weeks of this request for information ending, the federal government announced a special time-limited waiver that would address a lot of these issues of people not getting access to public service loan forgiveness for a range of administrative issues. And so for a limited period of time, the Department of Education is retroactively granting credit towards public service loan forgiveness to borrowers for months that previously didn't count for the program. So either they have the wrong loan type, again, because we went through the different types of loans, or weren't making the right payment. And so we're going to walk through some of these changes now and talk about how you can get credit for work that you've already done through this time limited waiver. Okay, so what does this waiver do? So essentially what this waiver does, it gives public service workers credit towards loan forgiveness, regardless of what type of federal student loan they have for any period of time since October 1st, 2007. That's when the program began. As long as they were in qualifying service employment and their loans were not in default, deferment, or forbearance. And so even for months in which borrowers did not actively make a payment, as long as that loan was in repayment status, you can receive credit. And so these credits are retroactive, so you can receive credit for past payments that were previously ineligible. So in short, for any months since October 1st, 2007, that you had any type of federal loan, worked for a qualifying public service employer, you were not in default, deferment, or forbearance, you can receive credit towards the 120 months required for loan forgiveness under PSLF. Again, so as a PSLF, so additionally, there's a program, we're talking about income-driven repayment, I'll say IDR a lot. As a PSLF, the IDR program has not lived up to its promise of delivering debt relief. So in April of this year, the Department of Education announced that it will review the IDR process and also count some periods of forbearance and deferment. So this means that periods in which you borrowers had up to 12 consecutive months or over 36 consecutive months of forbearance, you can receive credit for those months. In addition, the department will be counting periods of deferment prior to 2013. So in some cases, periods of forbearance and deferment will count towards 120 credits needed for forgiveness. And so we're still waiting on additional details from the Department of Education in the coming weeks, and we'll provide more updates as we receive them. But I just wanted to make this note because we're going to go through the waiver, but this also means that there's potentially more qualifying payments for some people. But it also important to note that this will not mean that anyone will lose payments. It only means that there are more opportunities to get credit for payments. All right. So there are many wonderful ways to get additional credit from this waiver, but it's really important to note that it's not completely automatic. So normally PSLF requires that borrowers have, again, a specific loan type. We talked about direct loans. And although this waiver allows borrowers with any loan type to get credit, people without direct loans must take some steps to convert their direct loans through consolidation that we talked about. But what's really important to know, when you consolidate your loans through this waiver period, so if you have FFELP loans or Perkins loans, you will still get credit towards past payments because of this waiver. And so, and almost all borrowers, regardless of what your loan type, will have to certify with the Department of Education any periods of qualifying service since October 1st, 2007. So the idea here is essentially you're raising your hand to let the federal government know that you work in public service and you want to access PSLF. So again, if the government doesn't know that you work in public service, they can't give you credit. So you also need to make sure that you're submitting a PSLF form. Okay. This is really important. I'm going to say this a lot. I'm going to really emphasize this date because we're only a couple of months away. These special benefits of the waiver only last until October 31st of this year. So that means that any borrower who must change their loan type through consolidation or certify their public service work with the Department of Education must do so before October 31st, 2022. This does not mean that everyone will receive their new credit towards loan forgiveness by that deadline. It's just that the paperwork has to be completed by October 31st. So credits are being given on a rolling basis, and the department may take more time beyond October 31st, 2022 to process everyone. So although if you get credits from the waiver, those credits are permanent. So if you don't, even if you don't receive enough credits to meet the 120 credit requirement by October 31st, you can still keep accruing credits after this time period. So essentially, it'll just add to the ones that you received during this waiver. So again, there are many people who might get to 120 credits during this waiver period, but even if you don't, you can still get extra credit. So it's really important to know that even if you're not at 10 years of service, to take part in this waiver, because you can get extra credit for months that you may have previously been ineligible. All right. So with that in mind, let's talk about the 3 things that you need to know and what you should do. So to start, do you need to take action? It depends. So to figure out how the special waiver applies to you and what steps you need to take, everyone needs to do 3 things. And so we're going to talk about these each in detail, but I'm going to kind of go through them really quickly. 1, confirm your past and present employers. Really important. Do you work for a qualified public service employer? 2, determine your loan types, and if necessary, consolidate. And 3, certify your employment. That just means raise your hand, tell the Department of Education that you work in public service by completing a PSLF form. Okay, so first, confirming you have a qualifying employer. Again, I know everyone here works for a nonprofit, but I really want to go through this step just in case anyone here has prior public service employer that might not be your current employer, or again, share with a neighbor, a friend, a family member, someone else who might work in public service. So first, confirming you have a qualifying employer. Nothing about this requirement changed during the waiver. So you still need to work in public service, except during the waiver, you don't still need to be employed at the time that you apply for forgiveness after your 120 payments. So for example, if you know someone who's retired or someone who previously worked more than 10 years in public service, but now maybe works in the private sector, they can still get public service loan forgiveness if they have more than 120 qualifying payments. And so again, I'm going to go through this really quickly. Qualifying employers include any government employer, federal, state, local, tribal, any nonprofits have a 501c3 tax exempt status. Certain other nonprofits also qualify. However, unions and political organizations do not. So any organization whose tax status is C4 will not be eligible for PSLF, nor do any for-profit employers qualify. So if you aren't sure whether your employer qualifies as a public service employer, so maybe not necessarily your current employer, but a previous employer, whether they qualify, the Department of Education maintains a list of qualifying public service employers that you can search. So it's important to know, though this list is not necessarily exhaustive, if your employer or previous employer does not appear on this list, it's okay to proceed if you believe that they're a qualifying employer. You can access this list by using the PSLF help tool available at studentaid.gov. I'm going to be saying studentaid.gov a lot. It's this hyperlink on the screen, so we're gonna go through that a lot. So let's just put a pin there. The employer database is going to be the first step in the PSLF help tool on studentaid.gov, so you can access it quickly to check your past and present employer status. Okay, step 2, what kind of loans do you have? All right, the 3 major loan types that, so there are 3 major federal loan types, but most people today have direct loans. But the other 2, again, we mentioned earlier, the Federal Family Education Loan, FFEL loans, and then Perkins loans. So the 3 types: direct loans, FFEL loans, and Perkins loans. For public service loan workers who have FFEL loans and Perkins loans, under this waiver, they're going to have to consolidate those loans into a direct loan. So what's special about this waiver, again, I'm going to repeat this because it's really important to do this and note this before October 31st. When you consolidate your loans, previously, you would lose any credit towards loan forgiveness, but during the waiver period, you can keep that past credit and apply it to the new consolidated loan. And so this is really important for people who have older loans, particularly people who have FFEL loans and Perkins loans. Okay, next. The final step that all public service workers with federal student loans should do is certify their qualifying employment with the Department of Education. So again, I'm going to keep saying this again because it's really important for anyone who, again, may have other qualifying employers. Qualifying employers are any level of government, 501c3 nonprofit employers, and certain other nonprofit employers. So the form to do this is called the PSLF form, but it was previously called an employment certification form. So for example, you may have heard the term ECF. Borrowers should make sure to certify their employment using the PSLF help tool, which is the same tool that you can use to confirm that your past and current employers qualify for PSLF. And so this PSLF tool is actually going to generate this form for you, and then you're going to actually send that to your employer, and they'll actually have to physically sign it. And we're going to talk about the steps a little bit later. Okay. So now We talked about the 3 steps that everyone needs to take to make sure that they benefit from the current waiver. So now I'm going to briefly show you some step-by-step instructions for how to actually do all of this, starting with confirming that your employer is eligible. Alrighty. So I told you we're going to see this page a lot. This is studentaid.gov. So you're going to see this screen share a lot, but we're going to talk about navigating this page through this page for different parts of this waiver process. All right. So you're going to log into studentaid.gov. If you don't know your login information, there's a really easy way to reset it and get access. So don't worry. I know a lot of us have not been to the student aid website since we were maybe students or coming out of school. But again, it's completely fine. Just make sure you actually do get your FSA ID, because we're going to be using this a lot through this waiver process. Okay, so once you're logged in, you're going to hover over to the Manage Loans located at the top right toolbar. Click on Public Service Loan Forgiveness in the drop-down menu, and then you'll see the PSLF help tool there. And you're going to click on that, you're going to launch it, and it's going to walk you through this process. Okay, so this is in the PSLF help tool. So borrowers can look up all of their employers since October 2007 in the help tool by entering their tax employer identification number, or EIN, and the dates of employment. And you can check your employer's EIN by looking at your W-2, by asking your employer, or for some larger employers, sometimes you can just Google them. Alrighty. And so then if your employer appears when you run the search, your employer is confirmed public service employer. So you should proceed to the next steps of checking your loan. So checking your loan types, figuring out, do you have a direct loan, a FFEL loan, or a Perkins loan, or in consolidating if necessary. If your employer does not appear, you could still be eligible as this list is not exhaustive. It could mean that no one else from your employer has sought PSLF in the past. So don't be discouraged by this. Especially if you know that you work for a qualifying employer, again, like everyone here on this call, or anyone who works, for example, for a government agency, and you know that you're eligible. So again, some employers will show up as ineligible. All right. Okay, so now once you make sure that you know your employer is eligible, then you should confirm what type of loans that you have. Okay, so I'm just gonna make a note here that this can be a little bit confusing because a lot of people don't necessarily know what type of loans that they have. So we're gonna walk through again how to figure this out via the federal student aid website at studentaid.gov. Again, you're gonna see this link a lot. Okay, to see all of your federal student loans, you should log into your online account with studentaid.gov. You'll have a dashboard there that lists your loans. Any that say direct, as long as they have direct somewhere in the title, are direct loans. And any that don't say direct will have to be consolidated. So again, if it's direct somewhere in the title, it is a direct loan. If it does not say direct, that is a loan that needs to be consolidated. For a more granular list, you can also download your loan data, and you can see on this slide what it's going to actually look like when you navigate to go through and look at your student loan data. Okay, and now when you go to the dashboard that lists your loans, you can see the current balance, and then there are also little arrows that'll break down the loan types that you have. Here, you can see that this person already consolidated their loans, and they already have direct loans. So once you're on this page, you'll be able to tell which type of loans you have, and you can see the other categories listed here as well, like Perkins or Graduate Plus loans. And certainly if you download your aid data using the instructions from the last slide, you'll be able to see which ones are direct and then also which ones are not direct. Alrighty. Okay, but an important note. So if you go to this step and you see that you have loans that are not direct loans, you're going to want to consolidate them, because again, in order to take advantage of PSLF in this waiver, you're going to need to make sure that your loans are direct loans. So we're going to walk through the steps of what does it look like to consolidate. Okay, again, we're back at studentaid.gov. Again, this part of this website is very important. You're going to be doing a lot of work here. To consolidate your loans, you're going to need to log into studentaid.gov again. You're going to hover back over to the Manage Loans section located in the top toolbar and click on the Consolidate My Loans in the drop-down menu. Okay, and then that's actually going to take you directly to the consolidation application that you can see here. So the consolidation application is actually going to guide you through the steps that you need to take, which include selecting which loans you want to include in the consolidation, confirming the amount and the rate of the new loan, selecting your payment plan and servicer, and then actually signing for the loan. Now, here's something that's really important, and it's a tip that's specific to the waiver. If you have a mix of older and newer loans, so some would be closer to the 10 years needed for forgiveness under PSLF, if you consolidate all the loans together, the new loan will be awarded as much credit towards forgiveness as your oldest existing loan. So if you consolidate old and new loans, when the consolidated loan is ultimately forgiven, the entire amount would be forgiven. This is especially useful for people who have older FFEL loans, but newer direct loans as well. And so you might not think to, also really important to know, you might not think to consolidate your direct loans, as some people might have, a mix of direct loans because they already qualify. But if you do consolidate them, they could be forgiven on the timeline set by the older FFEL loans. Alrighty. Sorry, I'm going to repeat that one more time because I mixed it up. So if you have older FFEL loans, but newer direct loans, you might not think to consolidate your direct loans because they already qualify. But if you consolidate them with your FFEL loans, they'll be forgiven on the timeline set by your FFEL loans. Okay. So remember, with the regular PSLF program, you need to be enrolled also in an income-driven repayment plan. So we're still in the consolidation process. So when you're consolidating, it's a good idea to select one of the IDR plans as your payment plan. Some of the names for these plans include, again, we went through these earlier, but I'm going to repeat them again as we look through this consolidation application. So income-based repayment, IBR, income contingent repayment, ICR, pay, PAYE, and repay, REPAYE. These payments plans within income-driven repayment are all different. So they all have different, they're different plans. And so there's a payment calculator tool that will actually help you choose the plan amongst these, the plan among these four that's the best for you. So you're going to see different plan options, but you can kind of look at the different ones and see whichever plan is going to work best for your financial situation. Okay, last step, we're going to certify your employment. So let's go through these steps, because again, we know that you work for a qualifying employer, but this is a step to actually let the Department of Education know that you work for a qualifying employer. Okay, we are back at our favorite site. We are back at Federal Student Aid. So again, you're going to start by going to studentaid.gov, the Federal Student Aid website. So just like with confirming your employers, you're going to go back to studentaid.gov. You're going to go back to the Manage Loan section located at the top toolbar and click on Public Service Loan Forgiveness in the top drop-down menu. And so we're going to go back to the PSLF help tool. So this is probably going to look pretty familiar from earlier. It's the first step in the help tool. And so then you're going to actually add in your employers. And then what the help tool is going to do is going to actually guide you through the next steps, including identifying which loans. Oh, sorry, did I go to this slide? Yes, we're confirming your employers. Okay, just make sure we're on the right side. Okay, there we go. Sorry. Then the PSLF help tool will guide you to the next steps, including identifying which loans you want to include for the PSLF loan forgiveness. And once you complete each of the tool steps, it's going to generate a form that you can use to certify your employment. Again, this form is called a PSLF form, previously employment certification form. So if you see here, it says generating your employment certification form. It's the same thing as your PSLF form. And it's a form that you must submit to receive benefits from the PSLF waiver. So again, this is a step that everyone needs to take. This is how you let the Department of Education know that you do want to get credit for public service loan forgiveness. Once you have the PSLF form, you'll need to have any employer that you are claiming as a public service employer sign the form. And then once the form is signed, you must submit it to the designated federal student loan servicer for processing to make sure you get the maximum benefit that you qualified for. Everyone must submit a new form that reflects all their qualifying public service work by the October 31st deadline. So October 31st of this year, you have to submit this form and have this signed form and submit it to the Department of Education in order to benefit from the waiver. One thing that's really important to note, if you've worked for a nonprofit that's now closed, or for example, like, so you're going back, you have previous employer, you have either maybe a former nonprofit that closed or an employer that you can't get to sign this form, they just won't sign the form for you. There is a box to check on the form that one of these is the case. And so you can essentially say that you're encountering troubles getting your employer to sign the form. And so if these are issues that people are encountering, there are ways around them. To send the forms, you're able to fax or mail them. Additionally, if you already have Fed loan servicing, so previously the exclusive servicer for PSLF, the PSLF program, there's an option to upload the documents to their website. You can also do any of these things. So you can fax it, you can mail, you can upload it. One thing to note, we're going to get to this a little bit later. A lot of people have probably already, if you have already submitted a PSLF form in the past, if you have already submitted a PSLF form in the past, you in Fed Loan Servicing as your servicer, you might notice that you're now getting transferred to MOHELA. We're going to also talk about the steps. If you no longer have Fed Loan, you can also upload that with MOHELA. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And so we're going to go through the next slide. All righty. So, okay, the process for getting forgiveness. We're going to walk through each of these steps. Okay, so this is a general process, but applies to the waiver too. Again, as I mentioned right now, previously Fed Loan was the exclusive servicer for PSLF, but now that's MOHELA. So we're going to walk through the process of actually submitting your forms to MOHELA. Just a note, some people might still have Fed Loan. If you still have Fed Loan servicing, you can submit your forms through them and they will submit them over to MOHELA once you're transferred. But I'm just going to just note that here that MOHELA will be the primary servicer, but if you still have Fed Loan, you can submit those forms through there. So, okay. So as I mentioned before, again, Fed Loan was the exclusive servicer for PSLF, but PSLF accounts are in the process of being transferred over to MOHELA. So again, if you're seeking public service loan forgiveness, you're going to send your forms to MOHELA, and they'll do a preliminary review of your loan eligibility. If you have a qualifying loan, your loan will then be transferred to MOHELA for servicing. At that point, it'll run through the other criteria such as employment and qualifying payments. And unfortunately, there have been a lot of problems with people finding out too late that they qualify, but they've had something wrong. And so for this reason, we really advise you to submit this form as soon as possible. So if you know that you're interested in public service loan forgiveness, we encourage you to submit this form annually. And so, so that way, so you'll do it each time that you change your employers so that you don't have to do this after 10 years and then hope that everything goes right. But if you do it every year, so again, certify your employment every year, and then every time you change employers, that way that you already have these documents on file and on record. And so that the Department of Education is already reviewing your paperwork. Okay. So again, also, if you already have Fed Loan Servicing as your servicer, again, that account is going to be transferred to MOHELA soon if it has not been transferred already. And then the companies will handle the transfer themselves. However, it's a really, really good practice in the same way that you submit your PSLF form every year, just so that you make sure that you're keeping track of your records and making sure that the department knows that you want to be on track for public service loan forgiveness. We really say it's a best practice also to keep copies of your own records. So because sometimes we know things get lost from one company to another, especially during servicing transfers. If you know that you have Fed Loan servicing, or you know that you're going to go through this consolidation process in order to get a direct loan and your servicer is going to change, please, please, please download all of your servicing records to make sure that you have a copy of all of your paperwork, just to make sure that if anything goes awry, you also have your own records. Okay, so really quickly, we're going to talk about some common issues that we've seen people encounter during this process and how you should address them. All right. So when you submit your PSLF form, or your also known as employment certification form, your PSLF form, your ECF, it's important that you make sure that the form is easy to read. If your employer has written over, or for example, tried to correct things after signing them, you should request a new form and send a new clean form for them to sign, because often if anything is crossed out or written over, like in this picture, the form is going to automatically be
Kat?
Yes.
Sorry, there is a bit of feedback on your microphone, and it's hard to hear. I'm not sure if something's like rubbing against your microphone.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I have a sticky note. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you so much.
Sorry, how many slides have we missed?
Oh, it's just been we've heard it a little bit in the past. This one was just a little bit harder to hear. I think you're okay. You might want to start from the beginning of this slide though.
Okay, I am so sorry, everyone. So if there are questions, we will go back through any slides we may have missed. Okay, so when you submit your PSLF form or your ECF, it's important that you make sure that the form is easy to read. So if your employer has written over or tried to correct things after signing the form, you should request a new clean form and resubmit it, because oftentimes if anything is crossed out or written over like in this picture, it's going to automatically be rejected. Excuse me. So, and we don't want, so your application could be delayed or rejected if you submit the form as is. So we just really encourage you to probably just get a clean form, have your employer re-sign it, and then submit it. Okay. When borrowers complete the PSLF help tool, the form suggests that a borrower must take their loans out of administrative forbearance under the payment pause, stating the following under the subheading, get out of deferment forbearance. And this could be a little bit confusing. Because the student loans were placed in an administrative forbearance under the payment pause and the pause payments continue to count towards PSLF eligibility, you do not need to stop postponing payments in order to make qualifying payments. So although the form goes on to state that a borrower does not need to remove their loans from the payment pause, we understand that this language can be confusing. Okay, next one. If you choose to use the PSLF help tool to complete your PSLF application, many borrowers are unsure how to proceed when they get to the question on this slide. If you think that you've already made more than 120 payments, the PSLF help tool might not let you choose that option, and that's okay. Just ignore it and choose no, I have not made 120 qualifying payments, and move on. Do not let this question hold you up from taking the necessary steps to receive the benefits of the PSLF waiver. So no matter what you select, your account will still be reviewed in full by the Department of Education. Okay, and then finally, from what we've seen, notices with inaccurate PSLF payment counts have been one of the biggest sources of confusion with the PSLF help tool. If you're consolidating an older FFEL loan in order to take advantage of the PSLF waiver, you'll receive a letter from either Fed Loan Servicing after this consolidation is complete, notifying that you have one qualifying PSLF payment. Don't worry when you get this letter. This is what's actually happening. It's an auto-generated letter that's hard-coded to review under the standard PSLF program that we reviewed at the beginning of this presentation. When you consolidate your loans, you'll be asked if you're doing so to take advantage of PSLF. Since you're consolidating for the purposes of PSLF, you'll say yes. And then after your consolidation is complete, your servicer will notify the Department of Education, who will review your account to determine how many qualifying payments you've made towards PSLF, towards the PSLF waiver. You'll then receive a second letter from your servicer saying how many payments you have towards the waiver. And as I mentioned before, this process can take a few weeks to a few months to complete, and the department does these in batches. So there's no concrete timeline for when you should receive this notice, but just don't be worried if you get this first letter that says you have one qualifying payment after consolidation. All right, important takeaways, and then we're gonna jump to Q&A. All right, so things to know. So again, credit's gonna be given for months during which any loan type was in repayment. Again, there is the deadline. It's very important. The deadline is coming up very soon, October 31st, and that is your deadline to consolidate if you need to, and to submit your PSLF form. You need to make sure you confirm your employer. Again, while I think everyone here qualifies for public service loan forgiveness, you might have previous employer, or again, if you want to share this information with someone else, it's really important to know to confirm that you have a qualifying employer. Confirm your loan types. Do you have a direct loan? And if you do not have a direct loan, so for example, you have a Feller Perkins loan, you need to consolidate. Submit your PSLF form. And then if you experience any issues, you can file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau or with the Federal Student Aid Ombudsperson. All right. So I know that was a lot, but we're going to jump to questions and we're going to go through. So thank you all for bearing with us. I know that was a lot of information. Oh, and Brady, thank you so much for dropping those links.
You're welcome.
So I don't think we have any questions yet, but we can open it up if people have questions, or I have some that are frequently asked questions that we can go over as well.
Awesome.
We're going to give some of our participants time to type into the chat. Not everybody has the capacity to be able to speak or say their questions out loud. So Amy, if you would like to dive into some of those FAQs, that would be incredibly helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Parent Plus loans, Kat, and if they qualify.
Amy, that is a great question. So we get this question a lot about Parent Plus loans. So typically Parent Plus loans do qualify for public service loan forgiveness because Parent Plus loans are able to get under an ICR plan. But unfortunately, Parent Plus loans were not included in the PSLF waiver. So what that means is, while Parent Plus loans cannot get the same benefits of the waiver, there is one small caveat. If you have a Parent Plus loan and you have your own federal student loans, you can consolidate your personal federal student loans that you took out for your own education with the Parent Plus loans that you have. And then that Parent Plus loan will now get the credit of the underlying loan that you have in that consolidation. I don't know if that was like a little confusing.
No, that's great, Kat. Thank you.
Sorry, I was like, I know that's a little bit confusing, but if you have your own federal student loans, there is a way that your Parent Plus loans can take advantage of this waiver, but otherwise Parent Plus loans were not included in the PSLF waiver.
Amazing, thank you. Are there any downsides to consolidation?
That is a great question. So when you're consolidating your loan, you're essentially getting a new loan with the federal government. And so that means you are going to get a new interest rate. And so again, your interest rate might be higher than your current interest rate. And then you'll also have to select a new IDR plan. And so your payment amount might also change, not only because of your interest rate, but also the payment plan that you might enroll in. The important thing to note is if you want to get public service loan forgiveness, and especially if you have an older FFEL loan or a Perkins loan, it's going to be really important to consolidate during this waiver period so you can get credit for any of those past payments that you've made under those FFEL or Perkins loans. And so while there might be some downsides in essentially having maybe a different interest rate or a slightly different payment, if you're trying to achieve public service loan forgiveness, you're going to have to consolidate those loans. And so doing it during the waiver at least allows you to keep your credit.
Thanks, Kat. Okay, questions are coming in. Like
nice.
5. All right, here we go. So given that the loan meets all qualifying criteria, can forgiveness also apply to the co-signer of a student loan?
That is a great question. And so I'm also going to break this down. And this is something we did not talk about. Public service loan forgiveness only applies to federal student loans. And so that's the first part I want to note, is because oftentimes when you have co-signers are on private student loans. And so, for example, if you are a co-signer on your child's private student loan, unfortunately, that loan would not qualify because it is a private student loan. Now, if you're talking about a Parent Plus loan, that is a loan that a parent takes out for the purposes of their child's education. Again, that's the answer to the first question that Amy asked about, do Parent Plus loans qualify? Typically, under the normal rules of public service loan forgiveness, Parent Plus loans can qualify for public service loan forgiveness. However, during this waiver period, you cannot get these extra waiver credits for Parent Plus loans. But if you have a Parent Plus loan that you took out on behalf of your child's education, and you still have your own federal student loans that you are paying off, you can consolidate those loans, and then they will be set to the timeline of your older federal student loan. And so just those two different scenarios. So if you're a co-signer for a private student loan, unfortunately, no. If you are a Parent Plus borrower, possibly. It's just a little bit, nuanced. And then also what we're going to do, we're going to drop a link in the chat for our website that we have, Forgive My Student Debt, that has more information on our Q&A about Parent Plus loans and a lot of the questions that we're getting today. So if you have questions after this, or if you want a little bit more detail on this question, we'll also share that link.
That's great. Thank you, Kat. Okay, another question. Just to be clear, during this period, we are not required to be in an income-driven repayment plan?
That is correct. So for example, if you're like, wait, I've been on, a graduated payment plan, I did not realize I could partake in public service for loan, PSLF, that's the purpose of this waiver. So during this waiver period, you do not have to be in an income-driven repayment plan. You can get retroactive credit for all of those months when you were not in an income-driven repayment plan. So any point since October 1st, 2007, up until now, you can get retroactive credit for any month when your loan was in active repayment status. So you can get credit for that. One thing I will note, if you think that you will still want to do PSLF after this waiver period, so on November 1st, you realize you still need more credits to get public service loan forgiveness, you will then need to be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan. But as of right now, you do not.
Thank you, Kat. Okay, next question. I've been working for a 501c3 profit for only 1 month. Will this hinder my application in any way?
It will not, and thank you for asking that question. Please take advantage of this waiver, and I really appreciate you for asking this question, because I really want to reiterate, we talk a lot about people getting their debt immediately canceled through PSLF because people realize they already had 10 plus years of service. But this waiver is also really important for people who do not yet have 10 years of public service loan forgiveness. So people who have been working in public service for a month, people who may be recent graduates and have only known the payment pause since they've been working for a qualifying employer. It's really important for everyone who works for a qualifying employer to take advantage of this waiver. Even if you don't know if you're going to be in public service for 10 years, get the credit, because you never know where your career is going to take you. So I really appreciate you for asking that question, because essentially, if you work in public service, definitely take advantage of the waiver, submit that PSLF form, and get credit for the months that you're working for a qualifying employer.
Thanks, Kat. And as a follow-up to that, can you review, does the time in employment need to be consecutive? So do you need to do 10 years right away?
That is a great question. It does not need to be consecutive. Public service loan forgiveness is cumulative. So you can work in public service for 2 years, go to the private sector, go back to public service for another 8 years, and add those two together and get credit. You can work in public service, go back to school, work back in public service. Like, there are many ways that people piece together their 10 years. It's not about being consecutive. It's just getting that 120 payments over time.
Thanks, Kat. Is there an order that borrowers should follow these steps if they're considering maybe consolidating or filling out their PSLF forms?
That is a really great question, and we really encourage you to go in the order that we went in the webinar. So if you need to consolidate, so if you have a fellow loan or a Perkins loan, or if you have a mix of loans and you know that consolidation is a step that you need to take, consolidate your loans first. Then you're going to want to submit your PSLF form. And the reason why is because the PSLF form, when the department reviews it, they're going to give you credit based on what that loan is. And so if you've yet to consolidate that loan, they're not going to be able to give you credit on that loan. So consolidate first, then submit your PSLF form. So thank you, Amy. That's a really important question about knowing the order.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. What about does this benefit people that have been denied PSLF in the past?
Amy, yes, this is who this waiver is for. And that's one really important note why we like to talk in this program about the problems with public service loan forgiveness and talk about how this waiver came to be, because it's really important to note that this waiver was created because so many people were set off track because of administrative burdens. And so we really like to go through that so people know you could have been denied before. Someone could have told you have the wrong loan type. You were in the wrong repayment plan. Your servicer could have told you don't qualify for public service loan forgiveness. This waiver period is for you. The point is to really be able to get people who are previously denied or ineligible because of administrative issues, really trying to relax those administrative burdens so people can get cancellation during this 1 year window. So that's a very important question. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Kat. What about, are there any income caps or debt caps that people need to worry about?
No, this is my favorite. This is one of my favorite questions, because it does not matter what your income is. It's about, do you work for a qualifying employer? Are you on the right loan, right repayment plan, qualifying employer, 120 payments? There's no income cap. There's no income limit. There's no cap on what can be forgiven. It does not matter what your debt is. If you meet the requirements and you get your 120 payments and the Department of Education says you've met the requirements, whatever your outstanding balance is, that's what's getting canceled. I also want to make this note too. In addition to there being an income cap, also repeating, it does not matter what your payment is, because we know there are also people who have $0 IDR payments or low IDR payments. It does not matter what your payment amount is. Again, it's just about meeting those other requirements. So even, for example, if you have a $0 IDR payment, doesn't matter. As long as it's your IDR payment, that is a qualifying payment. So just an important note there too.
Thanks, Kat. And what if people already paid off their loans, or what if they've made over 120 payments on a loan?
That is a great question. That's a great question. Unfortunately, if you have already paid off your loans, there's no retroactive credit there for PSLF. However, if you're doing this waiver and you have a direct loan and during the waiver process you have more than 120 payments, you can get the amount over 120 payments refunded. And so, for example, say you've been working in public service for 15 years and yes, that's right. Well, we'll say 14 years because we're in 2022. So say you've been working in public service for 14 years and you have a direct loan, but you've just never submitted a PSLF form. If you have a direct loan and you realize when you submit your form, you have 120 plus payments, you will get refunded for those amounts over 120 qualifying payments. So it is possible to get a refund, but only if you have a direct loan. It's exciting. Love people getting money back.
Thanks, Kat. And then just to confirm, so can you confirm that during the payment pause, these months of suspended payments have been counting towards PSLF? Is that right?
Yes, Amy, I love this question so much. It is really, really important because most federal student loans have been, so federal student loans that are owned by the federal government. So if you have, just make it simple. For people who've been on the payment pause since March of 2020, if you have not been making payments because of the federal student loan payment pause, those months are qualifying payments for PSLF. And that's also a really important note why it's important to fill out your PSLF form, because essentially that's almost like 2.5 years of free qualifying payments. So why not get those 2.5 years of credit? And this is also where I'm just going to make a note for everyone on this line. Everyone that you work with, so all of your coworkers, anyone that you know in your family, your neighbors, like any kind of like community group that you work with or engage with, please share this with them, because again, this waiver goes through October 31st of this year. It's really important that as many people know as possible, but also it's really important. There are 2.5 years where people who work in public service automatically get credit. And again, that's a fifth of the way to that 10-year point. So it's just really important to share that and to know that that period counts, because we really want to help as many people get their debt canceled as possible. And also just share the good news. And like, if you can help someone else get their debt canceled, why not?
Thanks, Kat. So what about, the deadline is October 31st. What do people have to do before that deadline? And then when can they expect to hear back from the Department of Education that their application has been approved?
That is a great question. So October 31st deadline. If you need to consolidate your loans, you have to consolidate by that deadline. And remember, you have to consolidate before you submit your PSLF form. You also need to submit your PSLF form before October 31st. So also make sure you give yourself time, because you have to consolidate your loans, and that's a process, and that takes a little bit of time. And then you have to get your employers and all of your previous employers to sign your PSLF form. So I would say don't wait, start today, get your paperwork in. Again, you may not hear back from the Department of Education by October 31st, but you do need to have your paperwork in by October 31st. And then also it's taking a while. There are a lot of people going through this waiver process. The Department of Education is trying to process all this paperwork, but it's taking time and it happens in waves. So if it takes more than a month, sometimes we heard it takes a couple of months. That's not uncommon, but also we've heard people hearing back within weeks or days. So like, it depends, because they're doing this in waves, but also do not be alarmed if it takes a couple months to hear back. But the important thing is get everything in by October 31st.
Thanks, Kat. I don't think we've received any other questions. I don't know if there's anything else you'd want to cover, Kat.
I think those are the main questions, but the one thing I'll note, if people continue to have questions, definitely go to Forgive My Student Debt, the link that Amy dropped in the chat. There might be other questions that you didn't know you had that are in there, or if there are points during the webinar that you want to review, particularly when I had my mic covered with sticky notes, definitely go back and review those. And then also, I'm just going to really just repeat two things. One, do this early. I know it seems like you might have some time, but October is right around the corner, and it's better to have your paperwork in early and just kind of know if there's anything that you need to correct. So if you do need to take steps, do that early. Two, again, please share with everyone you know. If there's a way like that you can share Forgive My Student Debt with your coworkers or anyone within your organization, let people know, your friends, your family, your neighbors, but really share this with as many people as possible, because we really want to make sure that everyone who can take advantage of this waiver hears about it. But I just want to say thank you so much to all of you all for joining, and Brandy, thank you so much for making this possible. We're just really just happy to share this information.
We actually got one final question.
Thanks, Amy. I was just going to jump in.
Perfect. So are you only refunded for payments made while you had a consolidated loan?
It has to be a direct loan. So only refunded for payments under a direct loan. Yes, that's a great question.
And on that note, I'd like to thank you both so much for your time and for sharing your expertise and making sure that everyone possible knows about this and making sure that we have access to it. Thank you.
Thanks so much.